We have an overload of symbolisms in our readings today. The Gospel is St. Luke's version of the parable of the talents, which we read last Sunday, and you may have immediately noticed the difference between the two. But let me focus on the first reading, which is another vision from the book of Revelation. The details are familiar. Most of them are actually borrowed from the books of the prophets Ezekiel and Isaiah and the apocalyptic book of Daniel. John is using here a style of narration that is common to the apocalyptic literature. The form of a vision, which is presented like a guided tour of heaven, with the visionary describing in great detail what he is seeing and giving an interpretation to the details in the vision. You know, if only the church were very strict about copyright rules, many of the fantastic details in the modern day fiction novels and movies like Lord of the Rings of Tolkien and the Narnia tales of C.S. Lewis, perhaps even some details in J.K. Rowling's Harry Potter, could be accused of plagiarism because many of the details that they're borrowing are really from the book of Revelation. In our reading today from Revelation 4, the visionary is given a guided tour of heaven. What does he see? He sees a heavenly court arranged in a series of concentric circles. And at the innermost circle is God's throne. And this is borrowed from the book of Daniel. And the throne is surrounded by 4 living creatures. One looking like a lion, another looking like a calf, a third one looking like a human being, and the fourth one like an eagle. Details borrowed from the prophet Ezekiel. Each creature is flying on 6 wings, a detail borrowed from the prophet Isaiah. The church fathers, like Saint Irenaeus, would later identify the 4 living creatures with the 4 evangelists. But that's for later. The 4 creatures are further surrounded by 24 thrones on which 24 elders are seated, obviously representing the 12 sons of Jacob in the Old Testament, or the 12 tribes of Israel, and of course the 12 apostles of Jesus in the New Testament. And they're supposed to be wearing white robes and golden crowns. Parang you have seen this in the movies, no? They fall prostrate before the one in the middle, who's supposed to be God. Even if they are seated on thrones, they're supposed to fall prostrate and kneel before the one in the middle. All power and all authority comes from that central throne. They give him honor and glory, or they kneel prostrate, they fall prostrate before the one in the middle whenever the 4 living creatures give glory and honor and praise to the one in the middle. Well, so that we will not have a spiritual indigestion, let me just focus on one detail in the vision that is being described by John in the first reading from Revelation. He says, the 4 living creatures have many eyes, maraming mata. And listen to how he describes the directions of the eyes of these 4 living creatures. They had eyes in the front and eyes at the back. Galing, no? Sana meron din tayong ganyan, yung may mata sa likod. And then, they have eyes that look inwardly and eyes that look outwardly. That's interesting. You will have to give parental guidance to your children if they are still little, as they are listening to this, dear parents, because they might have nightmares tonight. The characters described by John in Revelation are like characters in the monster movies. But since we are dealing here with an apocalyptic vision, the details have to be interpreted a bit. Let me just focus on the eyes. Eyes in the back. They represent being able to look back into the past, namely, having a sense of history, allowing the memory of the past to guide us in the way we conduct ourselves in the present. What about the eyes in the front? They symbolize direction, goal, or objective. We are supposed to see what is ahead, not just what is immediately there before us, but also that which is beyond us. This is about the gift of seeing into the future, of being able to anticipate that which is yet to come. The prophets in the earlier times, they were called seers. They could foretell the future, not because they used a crystal ball or did some palm reading. No. They could read to the future because they guarded the memories of the past. This was also because they could interpret the things that were happening in the present, how they were related to the past events, and how these determine somehow the future. It is all about discernment. The same four living creatures are also described as having eyes that look inwardly and eyes that look outwardly. These are metaphors about the gift of insight, both in the physical realities outside of us and the spiritual realms within us. They complement each other, the outward sight and the inward sight. Those who have no sense of interiority are usually also unable to perceive well the things that happen outside of them. Very often we look at the same realities outside, but we do not exactly see the same things. The Christian tradition has bred not a few masters of the spiritual life, people like Ignatius of Loyola, and John of the Cross, and women like Teresa of Avila and Therese of Lisieux, who have left their own legacies about the interior life of prayer, of discernment, and other spiritual exercises and disciplines, like we're doing now in this retreat. You see, stewardship, which is what the gospel is about, is not just about being entrusted with material resources. St. Paul in 1 Corinthians chapter 4, verse 1 says, "We are servants of Christ and stewards of the mysteries of God." Stewards of the mysteries of God. Oh, we are entrusted with many material things, and the parish priests are also managers and administrators, whether they like it or not. And we exercise stewardship there. But the shepherding is really stewardship of the mysteries of God. If the stewards of material things have to have the necessary gifts of sight, including foresight, hindsight, and insight, well, ganoon din with spiritual stewardship. Let me end with a prayer attributed to St. Patrick, a prayer that makes me imagine the church as a body with many eyes, maraming mata. the same Christ, looking as it were in all directions. And the prayer says, Christ with me, Christ before me, Christ behind me, Christ within me, Christ beneath me, Christ above me, Christ on my right, Christ on my left, Christ when I lie down, Christ when I sit down, Christ when I arise, Christ in the heart of everyone who thinks of me, Christ in the mouth of everyone who speaks of me, Christ in every eye that sees me, and Christ in every ear that hears me.